The story begins. This small family lived deep in the forest, far away from the city. But something happened to them that made them lose their faith in nature. This adventurous story starts by showing a man named Joseph, who lived in that forest with his loving wife Anne and their daughter Summer. They had built a small house there, where they spent their lives peacefully. After living in the forest for many months, they had become completely dependent on natural resources, meaning they hunted animals in the forest, ate their meat, and stayed healthy by consuming fruits. But in this modern age, just filling their stomachs was not enough to survive. They also needed money. So they found an alternative way. Whatever animals they hunted, they ate the meat, but removed the skin, and then went to the city to sell those skins. In return, they received some money, which they used to buy other necessary things. Now, Joseph called his wife Anne and told her to go to the city and sell the remaining animal skins. Anne knew that her husband Joseph had gone hunting deep in the forest with their daughter Summer. So Anne took the skins and started her journey toward the city. Meanwhile, Joseph was with Summer, teaching her how to hunt from shooting a gun to setting traps around the forest to catch animals. They had already caught many animals, but when they went to check one of the traps, they found that the animal caught in it had disappeared, with only a few remains left behind. Seeing this, both were shocked because this could have been the work of another creature. Summer told her father, "Maybe this was done by wild wolves. They must have sensed the trapped animal, come here, and eaten it. We all know how dangerous wolves are." And Joseph had to keep his family completely safe because the forest area was full of such wild and dangerous animals. So, obviously, that day Joseph couldn't catch many animals. Both father and daughter felt sad because now they had neither enough food to eat nor enough skins to sell. So, they started heading back home. On the other side, in the city, we see Anne inside a shop where she had come to sell the collected animal skins. She explained to the shopkeeper which skins belonged to which animals. But she became very disappointed after hearing the price. The shopkeeper was offering very little money for them. Anne insisted repeatedly because their livelihood depended on these sales. But the shopkeeper said clearly, "These are all ordinary animal skins. If you want more money, you'll have to catch something different like a tiger, a lion, or maybe a fox." Hearing this, Anne was shocked because those were wild animals that could easily kill them. Catching small animals was fine, as they could be trapped easily. But hunting such dangerous creatures required an entire military force. So Anne had no choice but to accept the little money he offered. She left the city, very sad and disappointed, heading back home. On her way, she saw some job posters on the walls and many students going to school. Anne had always dreamed of leaving the forest and living in the city to work, earn money, and give her daughter Summer a good education and a secure life. When Anne reached home, she became even more disappointed after learning that Joseph and Summer hadn't caught enough animals in their traps. Fewer animals meant less meat to eat and fewer skins to sell. Anne and Joseph started discussing how, at this rate, they would not be able to survive for long. They needed to take some steps to make life easier. But they didn't know that these steps would take them towards something that went completely against the laws of nature. Anne began scolding Joseph harshly, and that's why she told her daughter Summer to leave the room. Perhaps Anne didn't want her daughter to see her father being humiliated. Anne made it very clear to Joseph that their entire survival depended only on the animals they hunted. If he failed to do that properly, then living here would become impossible for them. But right now, there was an even bigger problem. Why were those wild wolves coming near their area in the first place? Joseph calmly explained that maybe some pieces of meat had fallen nearby, and that was what attracted the wolves. He knew very well that wolves always hunt in packs, and if they wanted small animals, they could easily kill them on their own. Still, Anne began to suspect that maybe the whole pack of wolves had started targeting them. If that was true, their lives could be in great danger. However, Joseph didn't take this situation seriously at all. He said it was just a coincidence and insisted that they should focus on catching more animals instead of wasting time on such useless worries. Anne then placed a brochure in front of Joseph, one that showed several job openings in schools in the nearby city. She made it clear to him that they couldn't live here forever. Other citizens lived in cities and enjoyed a better lifestyle, so they too should try to move there, find a proper job, and provide a good life for their daughter. But Joseph refused to entertain any of Anne's thoughts. Instead, he promised her that the next morning he would go and hunt down those wild wolves himself. He modified and upgraded many of his weapons, making them advanced enough to catch even large animals easily. By doing this, Joseph clearly ignored Anne's ideas. He didn't want to go to the city at all. He wanted to continue living right here, in the forest, for the rest of his life. Their argument stretched late into the night, with Anne repeatedly confronting Joseph. She emotionally reminded him that when he first wanted to live in the forest, she had supported him. She had adapted completely to this difficult lifestyle. But she didn't want her future generations, especially her daughter Summer, who had no other choice to live their lives alone in this forest just like them. For her, the best option was to move to the city. Joseph made it clear that they didn't have many skills, all they knew was how to hunt, and they were doing that well. According to him, every future generation of theirs would live the same way, deep in the forest, as it was the safest option compared to living in crowded areas. Defeated by the endless discussion, Anne stayed silent that night. When morning came, Joseph set out for the hunt, not for any ordinary animal, but for dangerous wolves. As he was about to leave, his daughter Summer insisted on going with him. Joseph couldn't refuse her, so he took her along. A little later, when Anne found out about this, she became upset and worried. Hunting wolves was no small task, and now Joseph had taken Summer along on such a dangerous mission. Over the radio, Joseph assured her that as soon as he sensed wolves nearby, he would send Summer back home. Anne wasn't at all convinced, but since they had already left, she couldn't do anything. For a long time, Joseph and Summer kept moving forward in search of the wolves. Eventually, they found some clues, footprints, and remains of animal bodies that confirmed wolves were indeed nearby. In fact, it wasn't just one. There were multiple packs around. Realizing the danger, Joseph immediately sent Summer back home. And now, perhaps, the real hunt of Joseph's life was about to begin, the hunt for the wolves. Whether he would survive this or not, no one knew. But we will witness how Joseph and his family struggled to survive in this brutal wilderness. Meanwhile, as Summer was walking back home through the forest, she began to hear several strange sounds along the way. Anne had also gone into the forest to fetch water and was coming back when she felt as if someone was following her and had just passed by her. Anne was now far more frightened than before, so she hid in a corner. Summer also had a gun for protection, so she held it in front of her and started moving forward. Even though Summer knew the way home, if any wild animal appeared before her, she would not be able to fight it alone. Meanwhile, Joseph, who had been lying in ambush, was lucky enough to spot a wolf. He raised his gun and tried to shoot directly at that wolf. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the distant forest, which Summer also sensed. She thought that perhaps her father Joseph had caught that wolf, but she still had to follow what her father had told her. She had to reach home. All three family members were still in the forest and had no idea what was about to happen to them. Joseph then began to follow that wounded fox which had been shot. As he reached that spot, he was completely stunned, because the wounded wolf had gone far away and there was something unfamiliar at that place. There lay a severed human hand which, sometime earlier, the same wolf had been eating. Joseph could not bear to look at such a horrifying scene and could not understand who could have done this. A very strong stench rose from that place, the smell of rotting flesh. Driven by curiosity, Joseph decided to go to that place. When he entered an open field, he was even more shocked. There were many women's bodies and several newborn girls' bodies lying there. They had all been killed in a terrible manner, and it was impossible to tell who had murdered them. Thoughts came into Joseph's mind that this could not have been the work of the wolf pack. No animal would kill humans in this fashion. Therefore, it became clear that there was a hunter who was killing these girls and collecting their bodies here. There were no major external wound marks on the girls' bodies, only internal injuries had caused their deaths, and it also seemed that the hunter who captured these girls tortured them first. Seeing this, Joseph began to worry about his wife and daughter because they were alone. If that dangerous hunter caught them too, their lives would also be in great danger. But Joseph decided that he would not tell his family about these unknown things. They might become extremely panicked, and then his wife Anne would insist on leaving. Joseph's heart was tied to the whole forest, and no matter what consequences he might face, he refused to leave. He swallowed the whole secret, returned home, and decided to act completely normal. But Anne, watching Joseph's behavior, sensed that he was hiding something. Summer had already reached home, and they all slept well through the night. In the morning, when Anne entered the room, she noticed Joseph was not there. He was missing and had gone somewhere into the forest. In fact, he had not gone hunting, but had gone to that spot where many dead bodies had been placed. On the radio, when Aunt spoke to Joseph, he plainly lied that he had gone to hunt wolves, while Joseph himself was facing a dark reality. Gradually, Joseph's mental confusion increased. Who in the forest could suddenly start killing so many girls? In any case, Joseph had to find that killer because his own family might soon be in danger. With Joseph absent from home, Anne went out with Summer to fetch some water. They lived their lives enjoying nature this way. Anne was busy with her chores, but Summer noticed that their pet dog was not there. She went a little deeper into the forest, calling for her dog. After walking for a while, she found no one, and ahead of her stood a wolf. The wolf saw Summer and immediately moved toward her. Summer screamed loudly and ran to hide with her mother, Anne. Now Anne understood how dangerous that wolf could be. It could pounce on them in one strike and finish them off. Anne had absolutely no idea how to escape from that wolf. If we ever get trapped in such a dangerous situation, with a wolf ready to attack and devour us completely, the first thing we must do is not show that we are afraid of the wolf. No. No matter what, the wolf is smaller in size compared to many animals, and in the animal kingdom larger creatures dominate smaller ones. They make themselves appear larger or do something to frighten the opponent into running away. Humans should act according to the rules of the animal kingdom as well. If we want to scare that wolf away, we must. To survive, one must appear larger in size or make a loud sound so that the wolf gets scared and runs away. There are many ways one can do this, for example, throwing a burning torch toward the wolf. Obviously, every animal is terribly afraid of fire. Or, if there's no other option, jumping into the water could also help. Even though wolves and dogs are good swimmers, wolves who prefer to stay in packs usually avoid going deep into the water. If we move to the middle of a water body, we can be safe from them. Anne, to protect her daughter Summer, chose one of these plans. She began shouting loudly to scare the wolf away. The poor wolf, hearing Anne's voice, really got scared and ran away immediately. Anne didn't want her daughter to suffer even the slightest harm, so she quickly took Summer back toward their home. But the problem was that their dog was still outside. It wanted to come inside, but somewhere in the forest it had gotten lost. After taking Summer safely inside the forest cabin, Anne tried to go back out to look for her pet dog. She kept calling its name repeatedly but got no response. After a while, she finally found it, but it was lying dead. Obviously, that wolf had killed their dog. Anne, heartbroken, touched her dead pet gently. That dog had lived with their family for many years. Especially her daughter Summer loved it deeply. Anne knew that if Summer found out the truth, she would be shattered. So, when Anne returned home, she lied to her daughter, saying that their dog hadn't been found yet and that they would keep looking in the forest, surely it would return soon. Anne also lied that she had informed Joseph and that her husband would definitely try to find their pet. Summer believed her mother's words and went to sleep peacefully. That night was terrifying for both Anne and Joseph. They had seen death closely but luckily escaped it. However, that luck would not last forever soon. They were bound to encounter an entity beyond their imagination. Morning came, and Anne kept trying to call her husband Joseph, but he was nowhere to be found. He hadn't returned home for a whole day. Worried, Anne took Summer into the forest to look for him. Ahead, they noticed some objects scattered on the ground. Among them was a ring. Anne thought that ring must belong to a human who had gotten trapped here. So, she immediately went to the police station to file a complaint. There, we see the head officer arriving at the station in his car. On his way, he noticed a car parked by the side of the road, but he didn't understand whose car it was or why it was. Abandoned. He left it and went to his office, where he saw Anne talking to a female officer, explaining everything. But the officers clearly told her that the area she was talking about was not under their patrol zone. They also said that since it was about a wolf, a wild animal, they could not take any action against it. It was in the animal's nature to hunt, and it was simply acting according to its instincts. Anne kept pleading with them, but her efforts were useless. So she returned home to her daughter. Without telling Summer, Anne buried their dead dog and brought home the carcass of a deer she had found in the forest. They hadn't eaten for days, so she cooked and ate the deer's meat. Still, there was no news of Joseph, whether he was alive or not. Both mother and daughter sat inside their cabin, filled with worry. At night, it was very dangerous to step outside. Suddenly, Anne's radio started catching a weak, broken signal, and some unclear sounds came through. She tried hard to connect it, but it didn't work. The next moment, they heard someone screaming outside. Anne, taking Summer with her, went toward the sound and saw a wounded man lying there, begging for help. Out of humanity, Anne helped the man and told Summer to go back inside. She brought the injured man home and started taking care of him. The man had some photography equipment with him, along with a radio. Summer was very scared, but somehow they managed to spend the night. The next morning, when Summer went near the stranger, she noticed his radio lying nearby. As she looked at it, she realized the man had woken up. Startled, she ran to her mother and woke her up. Anne came and started talking to the man, who introduced himself as Liu. He had multiple injuries, so Anne began tending to his wounds. But Summer couldn't understand why they were helping a stranger when her father had strictly instructed them never to trust anyone unknown. Anne, however, firmly told her that the man needed help, and if Joseph were in this condition, he too would have helped. After talking for a while, Liu revealed that he was a photographer who traveled to various places to capture nature's beauty. But while inside this forest, his car broke down, and when he went further in search of help, something unknown attacked him. He had no idea what it was, but it had injured him severely. Anne and Summer began to think that perhaps it was the same wolf who had attacked Liu and injured him. But they didn't tell Liu about this suspicion. They gave him some food so that he could regain a bit of strength. Liu had told Anne everything, and now it seemed clear that he needed to go to a hospital. The wounds on his body were too deep to heal in that place. However, Anne and Summer were also afraid that if they went through the forest again, they might encounter those wolves. Still, Anne and Summer decided to make an attempt to take Liu out of there. But since his leg was badly injured, he could hardly walk. When the pain became unbearable, they had no choice but to take him back home. Amid all this, Anne remained deeply worried about her husband. Joseph still hadn't returned, nor had he tried to contact them on the radio. Anne's mind was filled with terrifying thoughts. Was her husband even alive? Meanwhile, we see the police officer who was receiving multiple new case files all about missing girls. He was also unable to understand whose car was found abandoned in the forest. He wondered if the owner of that car could be the same person who was kidnapping all those girls. The thought disturbed him deeply, so he immediately went to that car to investigate. He noted down the number plate and followed the tire tracks leading inside the forest. Everything seemed silent around him, but suddenly, his foot got trapped in a snare. The trap was obviously one of those set by Joseph or Anne to catch wild animals. Unfortunately, the officer was now stuck inside it and began to scream in pain, struggling to get free. The more he moved, the deeper he got caught, and his wounds kept worsening. Anne, unaware that the officer was trapped nearby, was praying with her daughter for Joseph's safe return. By now, a whole day had passed. At the station, the female police officer noticed a message on her colleague's desk from his wife saying her husband hadn't returned home for a day. Concerned, the female officer immediately took her car and drove straight into the forest to look for him. That morning, Anne was still wandering through the forest, waiting for Joseph's radio signal. On the way, she saw a rabbit trapped inside one of their snares. Sadly, she had to kill it to feed herself and her daughter. Her face clearly showed that she didn't want to do this, but to survive in that place, they had to depend on hunting small animals. After killing the rabbit, Anne suddenly heard a faint sound, a radio signal coming from nearby. Following the sound, she reached a spot and froze in shock. Her husband Joseph's dead body was lying there. When she went closer, she saw a deep wound on his head. It didn't look like an animal attack. Seeing him in that condition, Anne broke down crying. She realized now why Joseph had not been replying on the radio. He had been dead all along. And she also understood that this was the work of the same hunter Joseph had once mentioned, the one who was killing people in the forest. Joseph had indirectly tried to warn her that, apart from wolves, there was a human killer lurking in those woods. And technically, Liu was the only extra man they had met in that entire forest. A dreadful suspicion rose in Anne's mind. Could Liu be the real killer? What terrified her even more was that she had left Liu alone in the house with her daughter Summer. Terrified for her daughter's life, Anne started running back toward her home. Meanwhile, the female police officer had also reached the forest, still searching for her missing colleague. The male officer, still trapped, heard the sound of a car and immediately fired his gun into the air to signal his location. The female officer heard the gunshot and followed the sound until she finally found him, but by then he was severely injured. She immediately called for backup to get help, but due to heavy bleeding, the male officer died right there. Anne finally reached her home. She picked up her gun and cautiously checked every room to ensure her daughter was safe. Thankfully, Summer was still sleeping in her room, but Liu was nowhere to be seen, and that was the most terrifying part. As Anne moved through the house, she suddenly saw Liu standing behind the door, and before she could react, he attacked her. Anne struggled hard to defend herself, but Liu overpowered her and beat her brutally. The sound of gunfire woke Summer, who screamed and begged Liu to let her mother go. By now, Liu had turned completely monstrous. He struck Anne hard, knocking her unconscious just as he had done to all those other girls before killing them. Outside, the police backup finally arrived and rescued the injured male officer, but it was too late. He was already dead. The female officer and her team then began following the traps deeper into the forest to find out what was really happening. Inside the cabin, Anne regained consciousness. Liu stood over her and said coldly, "Your husband came in my way. I was only finishing my work here, so I killed him. And now it's your turn." Anne looked around, desperately searching for her daughter, but Liu didn't let her move. So, she grabbed one of the traps lying nearby and struck him directly on the face. Liu screamed in pain as blood splattered. Anne had been injured, but she was the first to rush out, desperately searching for her daughter. Poor Anne entered a room, and the moment she stepped inside, her eyes froze wide open in horror. Liu had killed Anne's daughter, Summer, and her dead body was lying right in front of her. That moment made everything crystal clear. Liu was the same psychotic man who had been committing all those murders until now. Nobody knew what his reason was, but one thing was certain: both Anne's daughter and her husband were dead. Anne was so furious that she decided to take revenge immediately. Liu, who was already wounded, was tied up and hanging. Now we saw a completely different side of Anne. Her face burned with rage and vengeance. She grabbed sharp weapons and started cutting Liu's body while he hung there helplessly. After spending years in that forest, Anne had become skilled at cutting animal carcasses, and at this moment, she saw no difference between a human and an animal. She directly attacked Liu and began slashing him violently. After a while, it didn't even seem like Liu was a human anymore. None of his body parts were recognizable. The next moment, as the police officers heard the horrifying sounds, they surrounded the house and began shouting, "Whoever is inside, come out right now!" Within moments, Anne came out holding a knife and threw an organ out of the door. Several police officers rushed inside the house and were completely shocked by what they saw. Liu's condition was so gruesome that no one could have imagined it in their entire life. He was still barely alive, but only for a few moments. Poor Anne sat outside, weeping uncontrollably. In just one instant, her entire family had been wiped out. No one knew how she would go on living her life, completely alone. But one thing was certain: she had taken her revenge. But was it really the right thing to do? What do you think? Did Anne's revenge bring justice, or just more pain? Tell me your thoughts down in the comments. And if this story gave you chills or made your heart race even a little, then hit that like button right now. Let's see if we can hit 5,000 likes on this one. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because we've got even more mind-blowing stories coming your way very soon. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.